We're here to talk today about the politics of food and food as a weapon of mass destruction. Now that is particularly also my expertise in what I was doing before I started to work on the Eugene Hairston project. All of it stems back to the history and culture of African Americans in this country and what has happened since we've been on these shores. So they're not so far apart as you might expect. So before we get started, I want to talk about a couple of different terms. We'll be talking about hunger and food insecurity. And food insecurity is defined as the lack of consistent access to enough food for all family members to lead an active and healthy life. Sometimes we think if you give a hungry person a sandwich, that's enough, but that is not food security. So let's talk about hunger. Hunger is a consequence of living in a food desert, a food swamp, or being able to afford food that is available. Hunger has a generational impact, and that's why I think it's so important for us to talk about it. It's not even just the people who are hungry themselves, it trickles down to future generations. So when it comes to knowing who's hungry, that's a hard part for a lot of people. And we usually think of hunger like this, that when I was growing up, they would be offering babies. Right? Remember the Biafran babies with the flies all over their face? Hunger is always projected as being somewhere very far away in other places. But in fact, here's a local picture, right? There are hungry people right here in River City, as I say, who are hungry. And many of them might even be people that you know. But since being hungry is considered very shameful, a lot of people won't tell you they're hungry. They might show up at your house at dinner time, but they're not going to come out and say, I don't have any way of eating or feeding my children. So one of the questions I want us to meditate on, especially when we get to the discussion part, is why are we willing to let people starve right in front of us? Now, people will send their pennies and their dollars here, but they're not thinking about here. And these are the people who are right here in your corner. So those of us who are food secure have allowed others to go hungry every day except Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now, everybody's willing to give some canned corn to somebody for Thanksgiving, right? When they come around with the bag and say, can you help people? But the rest of the days, those people are on their own. And there's something immoral about that. When I was the director of the Research Institute at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, a news story came out about Guilford County being one of the hungriest counties in the nation. It was in the top 10 in the nation. And I was absolutely horrified by that. Prior to when I lived here earlier, it was an agricultural state. And I couldn't understand how people were starving in an agricultural state. And I certainly couldn't understand how people could be starving in a city and a county with 5 universities. It just didn't make sense to me. And so not too long after that article came out, I had the opportunity to come home and work at A&T. And when I did, I came with that passion of trying to bring that concern to light and to begin to get people to respond to it. There are a lot of things we can't change in this life, but we ought to be able to change whether people eat or not, particularly in an agricultural state. So this is what we're told a healthy diet looks like, and many, many people don't have access to that. Can you see the screen I'm standing in front of? So they don't have access to this kind of food. And apart from income disparity, in other words, you don't have to be poor not to have access to food, because it has to do more with when we say access, where the grocery store is. Can you get to where food is? And I can remember when I was growing up in high school, there were 3 grocery stores on Phillips Avenue. on one street, okay? And now, we can hardly keep stores out here in this area. And so that is not about income disparity because there's some pretty well-heeled people back over here in the corner. But it is political, and we need to get to the bottom of that. So Guilford County is home to 24 food deserts. And let me just stop for a second and tell you how I got into this discussion in the first place. I was working in Michigan, living in Michigan, and I read in the paper that North Carolina was one of the hungriest states in the Union. In the top 10 hungriest states in the Union. And I just couldn't believe it. Why people don't see this dearth of food as a problem is the $64,000 question. One of the things I learned whenever I would teach a class on food justice, which I try to do regularly, and I asked my students, where does food come from? Now I teach at the college level, so this is not the way fourth graders would answer, and they will say from the store. So most people don't know where food comes from. They certainly don't know it's coming from halfway around the world. I don't mean nobody knows, but I'm saying the general populace doesn't know food is coming from so far away. And we are blinded by the very concept of the idea of progress. We don't even interrogate the word progress, right? If it's progressive to bring all these other industries into this area that have nothing to do with food, we'll sell the land that used to grow the food, or because North Carolina is famous historically for depleting the land in its failure to not rotate crops, to grow monocultures, which is to say just to grow one crop all the time in the same place. You destroy the land when you do that. You have to rotate so it doesn't keep leaching the minerals that the plants need to grow. And so if you've destroyed the land and now you don't have any desire to grow food because you figure you can get it from someplace else, that's where our food went without anybody thinking about it. The other thing is people have decided they need to eat the same food all year long. People want strawberries all the time. Well, strawberries are a summer fruit. And so your body is actually designed for you to eat seasonally, even though we don't realize that our bodies are also connected to nature and that they have a cycle just like the seasons do, or what used to be the seasons before global climate change, right? So you're not supposed to eat the same food all year long to keep your body working properly. But because we want that, we don't care where it comes from as long as we have strawberries. We know we can't get strawberries from Guilford County 12 months a year unless it's grown in a hothouse. And when have you seen that? So the food ends up coming from all over the world or from places where certain kinds of things can be grown perpetually. So why do people live in food swamps? Or why are there food swamps? Of course, the age-old answer to that is structural inequity, that is literally built into the way that we live in this country. Structural racism, sexism, and elitism establishes inequities that are not easily overcome or transcended by intention, determination, and commitment. I can attest to that. You can't just have goodwill in mind and go out there and change it because it's all built into the economy and the political structure, even the educational structure of the place that you're in. Some areas handle it better than others. I take you back to our 27 food deserts to decide whether we're handling it. Ghettoization, probably not the right term, my term, that if you limit people, keep them from having decent housing or transportation, employment, and education, then they can't literally make enough money to get to another place where there are stores and food and gardens and such like. And then political insignificance. People who do not vote or whose vote is not seen to be relevant or helpful don't matter, okay? So nobody, other than maybe when people are running for office, maybe they will bring that up on their platform and maybe they don't, but to really, lay your soul on the table and say, I'm going to end hunger in my lifetime, usually doesn't happen because the people involved are considered politically insignificant. So here's the thing I think you'll be surprised from. We're used to knowing that poor people can be hungry. Not all of them are, but can be hungry, right? But what you may not know is that women register at the top of the list of people who are hungry. 1 in 3 households that are headed by women is food insecure. Their poverty rate is 4 times higher than that of married couples with children. And think about that now, because people will tell you now, you don't need no man, go out here and have your child, right? By yourself, you can take care of it by yourself, when in fact you may be able to, theoretically, but the system is stacked against that so that it becomes difficult for you to support them unless you're also growing food. The middle class, this is a tricky one that nobody sees coming, right? You know these people who live in the 6,000 square foot houses when they're married and then they get a divorce, and now you're living in a 6,000 square foot house and you got to keep the lights on and the air on and whatever, now that your husband's gone and he took the money with him. Those people tend to be very hungry, and they will skip meals in order to pay the bills that they have to pay to keep their reputation going. This is the hidden class of people who are hungry in our area. Also surprising, at least to me, are enlisted military. Maybe you have seen, if you've gone to a Starbucks, Starbucks in particular hires the family members of military personnel, and they wear a little button to say that Starbucks cares, and they hire them specifically because when you post to another location, your military pay goes with you. The military is paying you to be in the military, not your children. And so when you deploy, it's up to you. If your wife doesn't work or have a trust fund, then all the money follows you. And so almost all enlisted people are on some kind of food support system, usually SNAP, and if they have young children, WIC benefits. I thought that was amazing and shameful that the very people who are defending us against communism or whatever the thing is now don't have enough to support their families. Then there's the working poor. You've seen people who have a couple of jobs. Maybe everybody in the house is working. But because of the way this structural inequity, they are paying for housing that costs like the housing I'm living in, and I have a job. You know what I'm saying? That they can't meet that standard, even though people have multiple jobs and maybe everybody is working. And then, of course, the elderly, which matters to me. That there are 8 million people over the age of 65 who are unsure where their next meal is going to come from, particularly if they live alone. Okay, if you know people who live alone, chances are, not unequivocally, but chances are they may be skipping meals skipping meals, like eating 1 meal a day and drinking some juice or something, that this is a standard hidden disgrace in this country. A lot of people have family that helps to take care of them, but if they don't, they fall into this category. Okay, I don't like the term food desert because a desert is a naturally occurring phenomenon. And there's nothing natural about the way food is distributed around the city, the county, and the country. It's a political decision, it's a business decision that has nothing to do with the people. And it's not that there's no food in these communities, it's that there's the food that is available is the kind of food that has other consequences as well. So, for example, in a so-called food desert, the people that live in that community may have to access their food from the Dollar General, for example. There was a big movement about 1.5 years ago where they announced that the Dollar General was going to sell groceries in these communities that didn't have grocery stores. Well, what kind of groceries are those going to be? frequently you find that, I don't mean Dollar General in particular, but prior to that announcement, if you would find foodstuffs, and I use that term loosely, in those kinds of outlets, they may be foods that something has happened to. You know, when you buy food, it'll say you have to keep it at a certain temperature, or, you know, because if you don't, then bacteria will build up or something like that. Well, if you have a truck, let's just say somebody has a truckload of food that they're moving from point A to point B. Truck breaks down, food gets hot because the electricity goes off in the cooler. They're not going to throw that food away. They're going to take it and sell it someplace to people for such a low price that you're not going to care. Well, you won't even think to ask about that. Let's talk about water. When you go to the gas station and you see water stacked up by the pump so you won't forget to buy a case of water, if water sits out in the sun and gets to a certain temperature, the plastic from the bottle actually leaches into the water, and now you've got a toxic swill that's going to cause you health problems. But rather than walk all the way into the store to get one that's cool, sometimes people will just grab it, or it'll be priced to move. Well, when you do that, you're setting people up for real serious health problems. And so the food chain is directly connected to the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex as well. If I feed you certain kinds of food, I know you're going to end up in a medical pharmaceutical industrial complex. I know that. And I can charge you to treat you there. And it's going to have a deleterious effect because you can't now go out and buy fresh fruit and vegetables to feed your family because they're very expensive, right? And do they have to be expensive? We don't know. I mean, they have to be expensive if they come from Central America, maybe. But there are only, I think, 6 food companies in the whole country that provide food to stores. So you're not talking about one kind of farmer that supplies the fresh market, say, and another kind that serves Save-A-Lot. You're talking about what happens to that food in the meantime or in the middle. And they're different grades, right? So you're growing the food, some of it comes up and it looks great and it looks healthy. That goes to the fresh market. You have some that looks kind of withered or it doesn't quite get big enough or whatever the value concern is, that goes to one of the lesser stores. Well, if you live in a community that only has the Dollar Tree, and I don't mean to pick them out in particular because I love the Dollar Tree. I just don't buy food in there. Or a lot of people subsist almost wholly off of what they get out of a Sheetz station. Sheetz is a or snack emporium, but almost nothing in there is a natural whole food. They're industrialized food products. And that means that they take a little bit of something that's real and they fill it with lots of fillers and substitutes and make it look like the original thing, which now you're not eating a nutritious entity. So it has historical roots. It goes back to the beginning of this country. This is not some new thing they have invented. Colonial settlers, if you remember your colonial history, starved and dislocated indigenous people from their agricultural homelands, their hunting grounds and foodways to gain possession to their land. So for you, I'm sure if you live in Greensboro in North Carolina, you know about the Trail of Tears, and they made the people leave the place where they could get their food and moved out onto the plains where there are no trees, no woods, no forests, no running stream. And they couldn't get the food. So now the government forced them to become farmers, which you also remember from third grade history. If they were hunter-gatherers, then they weren't farmers, right? So in order to eat, part of their oppression, part of this weaponization of food caused them to do something that was outside of their cultural realm, right? Everybody comes to it with a culture. Food, which is why you go to a Chinese restaurant or a Japanese restaurant, not the same thing at all. because those cultures and how they prepare their food is different. This was denied to people who were here when the original settlers came, and everything that happened after that is the same. Slaveholders fed their slaves an inedible diet to save money and also to indicate that they were perceived as subhuman. Now, I want to stop for a second and remind you that when Africans were enslaved and captured and put on those ships that we know so much about, one of the first things they did was to, you've seen where they're feeding them some kind of slurry, slop kind of a thing. Well, it turns out that that is the garbage from the ship. The sailors would eat, and whatever was left, they would cook down into some kind of slurry and force them to eat. That was not in their diet. Think about if they had gone the other way, or you've seen some videos where in the future they're saying we're going to eat bugs, right, because we're not going to have any sources of protein. Well, you put me on a ship and start shoving bugs down my throat, there's going to be trouble. Or I'll just jump in the water and kill myself to keep from having to eat these bugs, which we heard a lot of Africans did, right? So the first thing they did to enslave them was to take them from their food supply, right? What you think of as food. If I can take that from you, I can control you. The other thing they did, perhaps you've heard this part, if they refused to eat, they knock out their front teeth and put a funnel down their throat and literally pour this stuff down their throat, so that you're literally also traumatized in the process of trying to eat this food. During downturns in the American economy, the wealthy allowed the poor to starve as they exploited them for their labor. If you think about the Dust Bowl, for example, when half of America doesn't have anything because the environment had changed and things won't grow. And of course there's the Depression, and you've seen that famous picture where people are standing in the food lines waiting to get a little something, right? But remember, that's also the jazz age, so people are drinking champagne out of their lovers' pumps, shoes, right? And all this flagrant consumption while other people over there are starving. Prisoners have been fed an insufficient and unhealthful diet as part of their punishment. One of the first places I learned about that was through Angela Davis. In one of her books she wrote, she talks about the impact that it had on her when they sent her to prison, and she had to eat that food because she grew up pretty middle class. And here she is eating slave food in the prison, and it really had an impact on it. It's also very carb heavy, and so you'll see if you watch prison movies on TV, people that go to prison come out and they're this big. And it's because they're not eating anything that's actual nourishment that can be processed by their bodies, and so it just packs on and the rest is history. One of the things that's happened in recent time that has changed everything about us and the way we even understand our food is the idea of time, right? I don't have time to do kinds of things. I can remember when I first got married and had a child, when I would come home and cook, and I cooked every day because in those days that's what the woman did, okay? And every single thing, I tell my students this all the time, every single thing was an individual element of that meal. You had to cut up the onion, you had to chop up the celery, right? You had to get the oil and saute it. Nothing. I remember when they invented Prego. It's all in there, right? Prego spaghetti sauce, because think how many steps that took out of your cooking time. Slowly but surely, we had TV dinners, but they didn't really catch on until a little bit later when we got, I think, probably to the microwave. So the microwave took a lot of time off of cooking, which freed you up to do other things. So now, most young people can't cook. I always ask my students, can you cook? They can't cook because they don't have to cook. We had to cook if you wanted to eat, right? And so our idea of how we use time has changed. And that's not a coincidence. The same culture that will feed you this swill also has convinced you to use your time for leisure and not for keeping yourself alive, right? Now you have time. I always lock on the people who spend the women who spend all their time getting their nails done and their hair weave tightened, because that time used to go to preparing food and caring for your family. Now we have all kinds of shortcuts. I'm not mad at shortcuts. I'm saying we don't interrogate anything if it makes our life easier and gives us more time for leisure. Well, at one time, even leisure included having a garden and growing your own food. You knew what that was, but now everything is you don't have to do anything yourself. That's the privilege of living in America. And so we're socialized to always take the shortcut and not worry about these little mundane things that people in other countries have to worry about. And all of that's happened in my lifetime, which is why I'm so conscious of it, right? I'm conscious of how much things have changed. I grew up with grandparents and family members who grew food in their yard. Everybody had a little garden. Everybody in the neighborhood either had some kind of little garden, even if it was just a pot on your porch that grew tomatoes. I grew up in Benbow Park in Greensboro. And all around us, even if we didn't have gardens in our yards, family members did, right? And so people shared, they exchanged food. My father was a dentist here, and many people who couldn't afford dentistry paid him in vegetables, right? He'd come home with a whole bushel full of tomatoes, and my mother, who was from New York and did not grow up canning, is like, what am I supposed to do with all these tomatoes, right? But that was a cash crop. It was a medium of exchange at that time, even though money might have been better. But the point is, you had access to it. Now you don't even have access to it. The other thing that has happened is that we now have GMO fruits and vegetables, genetically modified organisms. And the problem with a GMO is not that the scientists have gone in there and dinked around with it to make it so it doesn't brown as fast, go bad as fast, which is the original sort of reason for doing it. It's that they're literally introducing foreign species into the food. So for example, the first GMO food was the Flavor Saver tomato, and it had spider DNA in it. Don't ask me how they decided that the spider would keep the tomato from going bad faster, but they did decide that. So now you've taken DNA from a whole other species that's not that vegetable and put it into the vegetable to have this outcome that it won't spoil, right? Now on the surface, that sounds good to me, because I'll put something in the refrigerator and maybe I get distracted and forget it's in there, and next thing you know, you have to throw it away. That used to happen faster before, so you paid more attention to it. But what does it mean for spider DNA to go through your digestive tract? And that's just the one thing. I mean, they're all something different. They also, and this is what makes it a weapon of mass destruction, built in what they call a suicide gene, so that you can't harvest the seed from it and grow your own. It used to be when you ate, if you wanted to take all those seeds out the green pepper, you could take it to the yard and have your own peppers in the fall. Now it's so you have to go back and buy a seed each time in order to grow it, or you buy the little plant at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that, right? Because we don't want you to be nutritionally independent. Or that might be saying too much. We want you to spend as much money on the things we want you to spend money on, right? So even if you said, I can't afford to feed my children this good, nutritious food, I'm going to grow it. That's just the kind of guy I am. I'm going to put up a little plot in my backyard and I'm going to grow this. Chances are you're not going to grow it unless you go also to the seed store and grow it. And one of the things I found out when the NAACP project I was working on, Fishes and Loaves, had a huge community garden. we were going to assuage hunger that way. We're going to grow this food and we're going to give it to people that don't have any food. It all comes in at one time, right? So you don't have any squash, and next thing you know, you got 3,000 squashes out there in the field, and maybe people don't eat squash because they haven't had squash. They certainly don't eat broccoli, right? When you start trying to feed Black people, generally, in particular, farm-raised food, you're talking collard greens, you're talking corn and yams. Take them some zucchini, and now you're talking about a certain group within that group. So we would grow things, and they would say, well, I don't want that. I don't know what to do with that. Or worse, I don't have a stove that works. Because somebody in Greensboro will rent you an apartment with non-working appliances. Now what do? So we said, okay, we'll start a crock pot project. If we give you a crock pot, you can cook all, and we taught people how to cook in the crock pot. But food is culture and food is identity. So we eat what we grew up eating. And if you didn't eat that, you're not going to start eating unless you're an adventuresome person. I didn't grow up eating sushi. No, thank you. I like my fish cooked. But I didn't grow up eating sushi. And now lots of young people have because it's available. Before I would have had to go to the Pacific Rim to get that sushi, right? Well, now it's everywhere you go, so people are eating different things. But one of the things they weren't necessarily eating was these 10,000 squash that grow at one time. And then once you harvest them, there aren't any more until the next crop comes in. So we thought growing our own food would do it, and it does help, but it's not the only solution. There has to be more than that. So another reason for weaponizing is just literally social engineering, that we want to eliminate perceived undesirable people and inferiors. And we know, if you watch the news, who they, I don't know, won't say who they is, but you hear them talking about these people who are a plague on our culture and our land, and they're trying to take stuff from us, and we don't want to be bothered with that. The best way to get rid of them is starve them out. And think about all those people that cross the border, and then remember the other people put them on the bus to get rid of them, and then they get to some foreign place, and they don't have anything to eat. They're literally just standing in the street, and everybody's like, you ought to go back where you came from. That's what this is, social engineering. They did it to plunder land and resources that belong to other people for better use. They know what is better, and so I know you've seen here too, where highways go through, especially Black neighborhoods, right? They'll build a highway through there in a heartbeat. We can do something better here. Or we can put a golf course here. Something that dislocates people and their access to whatever their resources are. If you control people's food, you can control their compliance and cooperation, especially if people have children. They will do anything to feed their children. And so now you want me to do something heinous, I'll do it because I need to feed little Bobby. To diminish the mental, physical, emotional capacity of the young. It is no accident that so many children are hungry. These are children nobody's going to have to compete with when they become adults. You don't have to beat them out for a job, for a house, nothing, because they won't be able to compete at the same level as people who have been nourished all along. This is not an accident, this is a strategy. To destroy morale, motivation, and hope in adults, right? If I can't feed my children, no matter what I do, I'm working 2, 3 jobs, they're home alone. What could be worse than that? While I'm trying to get enough money to feed them, then at some point, I just go along to be able to get along. And this is a well-worn strategy that's been used across time. And then more importantly, at least to me, because they only think about money, is that it becomes fodder for other economies of scale. So if I don't feed you right and you don't develop properly, mentally, emotionally, educationally, intellectually rather, then you might end up in the prison industrial complex. especially if you're out here stealing food to eat, right? You can go to jail for stealing food just like you can go to jail for stealing a car. And so it's a pipeline to the prison industrial complex if I deprive you of food, okay? It's also another lane may take you through prison, but it also will inevitably take you into the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex. And this is what happens to mature people. You've been eating this slurry for a really long time, and now all kinds of things are wrong with your body because you've been eating something that was not food that requires medical intervention. And if you don't have money for medical intervention, now you're going to go to where poor people get medical help, and God protect you over there, right? Because when you have to beg for help, then people feel like they can harvest your kidney or something. Urban, suburban, and rural development. Everywhere I look, people are developing areas that used to belong to other people, or used to be, even if they were low income and undeveloped, they're still taking it. It's the place you called home, right? And when they move those people, they will move them to a place that doesn't have access to the things that you need to survive. It also opened the door, and this is the most alarming part, I think, for everybody in this room, to create fake food. Now, if you don't read information about food production, you don't know you're eating fake food. You may have a hint at it. You know that chicken breasts are 10 times bigger than they were when you were a kid. Not you. You. Right? I mean, remember when one chicken fed a whole family? Now, one person can eat half a chicken, a whole chicken, depending on whether they're an athlete, I guess. And so the flesh of a chicken is literally different than it used to be. That's because it's not the same kind of chicken, okay? Perhaps you heard about pink slime way back ago, right? That hamburgers were made out of pink slime, and what they did was to take everything that was left over in a cow, grind it down, turn it into a slurry, dye it pink, ammoniate it first so it doesn't stink. And I mean everything, sinews, tendons. The thing that shut me down from the commercial hamburger was the eyeballs. I'm not trying to eat any eyeballs. I'm not going to do it. They bring that down into a slurry, dye it pink, put flavor in it, and then shape it like whatever the food was supposed to look like when you get it. So don't eat chicken tenders unless you eat Chick-fil-A, and I'm not sure about them. Okay? Any meat you buy that doesn't have a bone in it is apt to be fake food. And it's not made out of other food. Okay? It's not like a recombination of food. It literally is a chemistry experiment mixed in with some fattening stuff, which is why nobody can lose weight, right? Because you're not eating something your body can digest. Reasons for weaponizing food. Aerial land is appropriated for other purposes, we talked about. Low-income areas are often gentrified, especially in big cities. They'll come through and change that neighborhood in a minute. And only 2 or 3 people will come in. I went to Howard University for my doctorate, and when I went there, the area around Howard was downright scary. They had never built it back up after Martin Luther King was shot, and it had devolved into something really frightening to go back and forth. I used to ride the bus to school from Silver Spring, and I swear, I was a grown woman. I was at least 35 years old. By the time I got to school, I'd be crying because, first of all, I was afraid of the people because most of them were on drugs because they didn't have any food. They were hungry. They're in the street. Now you go there, you can't swing a dead cat and hit a black person unless you're on Howard's campus because they have gentrified that whole area through there. And what was once a burned out slum is now all these houses that nobody will ever go back and no black person will ever be able to go back and live in because they've just been priced out of their range. So that goes with one of the ways you can drive people out of an area is cut off the food supply. Again, we're back to the undesirable populations are displaced or eliminated altogether. As you can see, these wars, we don't mind just killing everybody by denying you food. That's one way to get rid of you. There's a competition for civic resources, jobs, housing, and transportation. That puts an end to that. I don't have to worry about sending the bus to where you are, or not the bus, but the bike lane to where you are, because you don't matter in this regard. It all comes to me. It opens markets for fake and artificial food, and then these populations are dehumanized, vilified, and marginalized as impediments to progress. So food insecurity, apart from those terrible things that are sort of environmental and structural, it also creates human change. If you're eating something that isn't really food and wasn't designed to be digested by your body, it might have been designed by food chemists, but not by God for you to be eating that stuff, then you're going to have all kinds of problems as a result. And they call this ultra-processed industrial food because it goes through so many changes that by the time it's a finished product like that, it doesn't have any of the original nutritional elements in it that it would have had if you had really cut up a cow and cooked it and put it on a bun. That used to be wheat, okay? And it's also why people are having so many food allergies. As an adult, my son became allergic to peanut butter, and he, lived on peanut butter sandwiches because nothing is what it used to be or what it seems to be. And eating these foods also affects your growth and development. It weakens your cognitive functioning. You can see people that are only eating sugar, salt, and fat, but those are the only natural elements in there, sugar, salt, and fat. You can see how it changes their personalities, how it changes their level of cooperation, et cetera. And it diminishes the propensity for defiance and resistance. When you see people who are hungry in neighborhoods, you see people sitting around, right? Because who has the energy to do something if you don't have any nutrients to stimulate yourself? So it fosters not only passivity, but addiction. Sugar is addictive. Sugar might as well be crack. Your whole body, your whole alimentary canal is coated for sugar. From your mouth to your anus wants sugar. So if you give it some sugar, it wants some more sugar. If you give it caffeine, it wants some more caffeine. Think about Red Bull. Red Bull is nothing but sugar and caffeine and something you don't know what it is. Don't drink it, right? And so you see people knocking them back hand over fist because they say it's going to give them energy, which it kind of does, but it's also the thing that will give you diabetes because it fools with your blood sugar levels. And crime, because if you are addicted enough, you will steal a honey bun. Okay, if you need your sugar fix, you will steal that honey bun. And it makes people sick, and people who are hungry, not just food insecure, but downright hungry, often live in the midst of domestic violence. If you can't take care of yourself and other people, domestic violence often follows right behind. And as you are looking at those pictures, I'm here to tell you nothing over there is real. Don't eat it. So here's the situation. The hallmarks of hunger in children is, is anybody in here a teacher? Was a teacher? Aren't you a teacher? Even if it was a century ago. The inability to concentrate and learn. You go into a classroom now and it's like, ah, right? Because everybody's hyped up. If they have anything at all, it's likely to have a whole lot of sugar in it. Little girl yesterday, that little girl had a lot of sugar in her. Poor academic performance, behavioral problems, stomach aches, headaches, and other ailments. Children complain all the time about how they feel. Listlessness and hopelessness. So you can't motivate young children in these circumstances to go be an airplane pilot or an astronaut because they can't imagine a fruitful future like that, because your imagination requires at least some stimulation or feeding, if you will, from the food that you ingest. Here's an alarming note. College students are among the highest rising hungry people now. It costs a grip to go to college, and when you get there, you may not have money for books and food plan. And so people will come and they don't have enough money to do it the way you could have done it in the 70s. And they end up hungry. So most campuses, certainly the ones I've been on, are trying to deal with this idea of student hunger. Some of them have food banks, and some of them don't. And you're on your own to figure it out. Back to the seniors, 65% of seniors are more likely to become diabetic in their maturity because of the kinds of food that they're eating. They're also likely to suffer from other conditions such as congestive heart failure, high blood pressure, asthma, obesity, and gum disease. Don't overlook gum disease, right? People think your teeth are just ornamental to make you look good when you smile. Your teeth are the first stop on your alimentary canal. If you don't have all your teeth and you can't chew your food properly, which means it's not going to be digested properly, you're not going to get energy from it, you're just swallowing stuff and it'll just come back to you. Gum disease is key. Food insecurity is most common in people between 75 and 84, particularly if they live alone. If you know some seniors, please go see them and take them a pie. No pie, that's sugar. A meat pie. It has impact on families as well, the individuals and then the family as a whole. Hunger and food insecurity can lead to poor health outcomes for children and adults, including chronic diseases, nutrient deficiencies, and mental health disorders. Mental health disorders is key because a lot of the chemicals that you're taking in will give you mental health issues. It's not only crack that'll mess you up. Sometimes it's the French fries, okay? The other thing is that you will see an astronomical number of children who have asthma who are poor. And all of that is tied into this inability to have nutritious food. Food insecurity can be a powerful stressor for families and can negatively impact a child's physical, social, cognitive, and behavioral development, as we know. So now you hear more about people who teach school complaining about children's behavior in the classroom or even in the community. You can see it. And you say, well, they weren't like that when I was coming up. When you were coming up, you had food. Hunger can drive conflict between people. If you're arguing in your family about who didn't bring enough money in here to buy the food, it literally destroys families, particularly for the person who is presumed in that family to be the provider. It's not always the man, but sometimes it is, right? And hunger spawns domestic violence. So I want to stop here for a second because frequently we think of these things as being very disparate, right? A lot of different kinds of things, when in fact, if you followed them all back down here, you're going to find the food. So if you came from a home where there's domestic violence, or you wouldn't pay attention in class, or you're acting out, somebody would send you to the psychologist. They wouldn't send you to the nutritionist. They would assume you crazy, you're not acting right, when in fact you might not be able to because you don't have what it takes to act right anymore. So what can be done? Not sure. Here's what's happening now. Here's some of what's happening now. It's not an exhaustive list. SNAP, WIC, school lunch, these are government-sourced hunger relief programs that most people are living on, at least the SNAP benefits. And SNAP also, a lot of seniors rely on SNAP for their food sourcing. When COVID hit, one of the problems in closing down the schools, you will recall, was that so many children get most of their food when they go to school. They get their breakfast at school, they get their lunch. If they're in an after-school program, they get a third meal. And when it closed down, those kids got nothing. There wasn't even a food pantry open because it was COVID, right? So something has to be done to widen that. WIC is women and children, so that's like things that are designed. I read this just this morning. The things that you get are designed to improve your immunity. So it's mainly dairy and things like that, a narrow band of what you can get. And of course, there's school lunch. Now, my problem with that, if I'm gonna skip ahead and go to my problem with that, is that it's almost all carbohydrates. When you see what they're eating French fries, pizza, and peas. Peas are the green vegetable. Peas are not a vegetable. Peas are a starch. Write that down in case you're giving your kids peas. It's not, it's a starch, right? So you're eating 3 starches, which is the same as junk. So, how do you think we should respond to this situation? It goes without saying that everybody needs food, shelter, right? Healthy food and shelter, safety. And everyone, at least I grew up believing everybody, but deserves respect, dignity, and grace. I wanted to show you this from my private collection because I think it's connected to what we're talking about. These are authentic slave shackles. You can see the size, which was, it goes like this, so the slave would have their hands like this, that was designed for a child. What diabolical person decided that a child whose wrist is this size needs iron shackles to control them? The very same people that make our food, that controlling us from the cradle to the grave in order to make a profit someplace else is the American way. I wish you could feel this because it's iron and it's very, very heavy. The thing that's wonderful about it to me is that they made it out of iron so it would last, and it does last, and I take it everywhere I go to show you what the mindset of America is. Please tell me it's different. Now, everybody's complaining about schools, about food, about the youth. This is how they decided to think about us, even procreative rights, I should have put that in there, from the cradle on. And just to show you a comparison, this is the adult shackle. These shackles have been authenticated and carbon dated. They're from the 19th century and were authentic. And I think this is probably about 3 pounds. So you would have had this on your ankles and maybe on another set on your wrist, depending, and an iron chain that went from your waist to the waist of the person behind you. And then somebody would have made you walk from South Carolina to Georgia so you could start your enslavement. By the time you got there, you'd have no skin on your ankles and wrists because this is so heavy. And now they have them for children. This is a metaphor that we need to keep our eye on because I'm going to say nothing much has changed. Eugene Hairston, who was lynched downtown Greensboro when he was 17 years old, didn't have shackles, but he also didn't get to live out his life as a farmer, as was his family, more like sharecroppers, because there's not enough room for everybody. There's no reason for everybody to stay in some people's minds. This is a weapon of mass destruction that wiped out lots of black people on both sides of the ocean, and so is food. And we have to think of it like that and begin to come up with an idea of how we can save ourselves. I wish I had the answer, but I do know it's a problem. And that if we don't get on it, it's going to be too late. And the same goes, we've been talking about food, the same is water. I point you again to the Palestinians. If you don't have water, you're going to die in 3 days? You can go, I think it's 5 days with no food, but you can't go without water. And so we have to think, when the trouble comes, where are we going to get both?